that was the murder of George Floyd. I want to again express my profound condolences to Mr. Floyd's family and friends. It's clear that they not only carry their own pain and grief, but the pain of generations of Black Americans denied fundamental dignity, respect, and fairness that they deserve. Mr. Floyd's tragic death echoes through too many decades of hopes dashed, promises broken, and lives taken. It is right that the officer who killed him was charged with murder. As I said before, I believe the other officers who helped pin him to the ground and to his death also must be held accountable. And I believe that the United States Department of Justice should commence an investigation into all of the incidents that led to this death. Over the past 2 days, many across Seattle have come together to grieve the loss of Mr. Floyd, to protest and commit themselves to the cause of justice. Coming together is a right we all honor and cherish. Our First Amendment rights are fundamental to who we are as Americans. For most of yesterday, people came and they were peaceful as they expressed their grief, as they built community, as they expressed their anger and demanded greater justice. I want to thank all of those who chose to exercise their right to protest peacefully, to speak out, to demand justice and accountability. Those protests are part of who we are as Seattleites and Americans. It's a cherished right that makes us better as a city and better as a country. However, late yesterday afternoon, some events and some people swiftly turned violent and led to multiple fires being intentionally set downtown. This was not just the case in Seattle, but the case across the country. These participants threw lit fireworks into peaceful crowds. Demonstrators threw bottles of frozen water at police, rocks, and other projectiles. Many multiple Molotov cocktails were thrown, and dozens of businesses' windows were broken and looted. I also want to acknowledge that much of the violence and destruction, both here in Seattle and across the country, has been instigated and perpetuated not by the people most impacted by generations of discrimination and institutional racism, but by young white men. These were not the acts of allies. These were the acts of people who came with their own intentions to destroy, to injure, and to cause chaos. These individuals experienced the height of privilege and are co-opting peaceful demonstrations organized by and meant to be centered on people of color, particularly Black Americans. In Seattle, we saw a video of a group of such young men setting an SPD vehicle on fire. I do not believe that these actions were done in the name of justice or racial equity, but rather chaos, destruction, and hate. Engaging this type of violence, while maybe aimed at police and businesses, jeopardized the lives and livelihoods of so many. As I walked through Seattle this morning, I talked to small business owners who desperately for hours tried to save their businesses against destruction, looting, and fire. And this was after 2 months that they struggled to keep their businesses in place through this COVID pandemic and the devastating economic impacts of that pandemic. Again, these were not the acts of allies. These were the acts of people bent on destruction and chaos. Last night, as pockets of demonstrations quickly escalated downtown, we saw quickly that a number of fires started to develop. And I will tell you, it was somewhat stunning to be at the Emergency Operations Center and to have screens of so many parts of downtown, to see the peaceful protests go forward with thousands of people there listening, to hear the fiery speeches and the calls for justice by the speakers, and yet blocks away, people starting fires, causing destructions, throwing Molotov cocktails, projectiles, purposely trying to injure and hurt people without regard for the people who came to protest peacefully and demand justice. I will let both chiefs speak in more specific detail about the timeline, but I want to emphasize a few things. First, we'll talk about the curfew. There were no arrests made for violation of the curfew. Our intent with the curfew was to educate and encourage voluntary compliance, to find ways to get people who were peaceful downtown out of the downtown corridor so that we could address those who are determined to have criminal activity, looting, burning, and the like. I want to take this opportunity to remind people the curfew will be in effect from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. today. This does not prevent you from commuting to work as an essential business, addressing a medical emergency, or the like. Remember, we are still in a stay-home order anyways. We are under a pandemic of COVID. We need to stay home to take care of ourselves. So for Seattle, the curfew is in place. We expect, please people, stay home and stay safe. At the city, we will be broadcasting information about the curfew all day. We're doing it in multiple languages. We're reaching out to community and neighborhood groups. We will answer questions people have about that. We very much appreciate people's participation and observing the curfew. We saw last night that those people who were peaceful protesters who came downtown did leave the area after their protests. We've received a number of questions about officers' use of force, and I want to acknowledge that there has been a number of reports about officers using force over the last 2 days. During the demonstrations, all uses of force will undergo a high level of scrutiny and review by the chain of command, by the Seattle Police Department's Force Review Board, by the Office of Police Accountability, and by the Office of Inspector General. All of these entities will be reviewing, and if any use of force was outside of compliance, an officer will be held accountable. Retaining and building community trust is so critical, and SPD, working together with community, have worked tirelessly to do this over the last many years. I want to remind you that if you are a person who experiences what you believe is an inappropriate use of force, please do report it. It will be investigated appropriately. But we also want to remind people that some of the videos that they have seen, we all know from previous investigations that what the context of what happened before is important. I visited downtown this morning, and it wasn't a downtown that I recognized. There was much destruction and much broken glass. But what I did recognize were the hundreds of volunteers and residents who came because they love Seattle. And what they saw was not the best of Seattle or the Seattle that they know and love. They brought their brooms, they brought plywood, they brought their tools, they brought the best thing I've ever seen to get graffiti off. As one woman said when we were standing there, she said, I asked what brought her here, and she said, we are not going to let those people take our city down. We are coordinating with hundreds of volunteers, small businesses, community groups, who voluntarily just came to restore the Seattle they love. We're doing all we can to facilitate that and coordinate that. We will make sure that downtown is not only restored, but we come back stronger and more healthy. We are going to have to move additional equipment into the downtown area for larger scale repair jobs and some heavy equipment. For everyone's safety at that time, during this cleanup, we're going to be asking the volunteers to leave at some time so we can bring the heavy equipment in and have street sweepers and the like. And there will be some closed streets that we'll give you information about later. If you would like to keep cleaning, we will show people where they can do that. I would remind people that it was not just the downtown core, but one of the most cherished areas of our city, Chinatown International District, took the brunt of these activities Friday evening and early yesterday. We've been down in Chinatown International District as a city trying to help businesses clean up and board up. It's a part of town that had already been so devastated by so much of the hate and bias generated during the COVID outbreak. I'll be down there later today to work with the community and see for myself what we can do to help them as a city. Again, we'll be closing some streets coming in and out of the city to enable ourselves to continue the cleanup operations as well as securing the safety of those buildings. I want to close. I want to give it to Chief Best, but again, I want to thank the people of Seattle who turned out yesterday peacefully, not just downtown, but in other neighborhoods like Lake City, South Seattle, and other places where you saw students from high schools, members of communities of color and their allies, all coming together to speak with one voice to say that what happened to Mr. Floyd was wrong. But it was not isolated. It touched upon generations of broken promises and lives taken. We must recognize as a society the systemic racism that has existed in our nation and upon which our nation was built in many ways. And we must acknowledge it if we must end it. And until we do so, we will not be able to heal as a city or a nation. And so for those people who speak up and continue to hold us accountable, thank you. But for those people who came for destruction, for anger, for chaos, we will not allow that to happen. We will continue to stop and arrest such people, and we will urge them to think about what this is about. If you want to honor Mr. Floyd, that is not the way to do it. And with that, I'll give you Chief Best.
Well, good afternoon. Mayor, we didn't think this was going to be as emotional as it is, but I just want to thank you for your leadership, for your passion and your compassion, and your words for today. I know that they are heartfelt, and it means a lot to all of us. I'm angry. I'm angry about the murder of George Floyd. I'm angry about the justice system that continues to create disproportionate harm for Black and brown people. I'm angry that people would come into the heart of our city and create the destruction and damage that they did. And I'm angry that those who came to Seattle to peacefully express their sorrow, their anger, their frustration, were denied the right to do so by groups that were focused on destruction. Because of this destruction and their intent, deliberate intent, to harm officers, instead of peacefully protesting, the Seattle Police Department made dozens of arrests. We arrested people for assault, for obstruction, for burglary, and for failure to disperse when asked to do so lawfully. We didn't make, as the mayor mentioned, any arrests for curfew violations. There were so many other things that were happening. Multiple vehicles were burned yesterday. City vehicles, people's personal vehicles that were important to them, up in flames, just like that. Dozens of businesses were broken into and looted over the course of the evening. Businesses in our city who were already struggling and suffering under the pandemic are now faced with this. So this is why you'll see the emotion and people, bringing up the concern that we have, because we walked around this morning, both Chief Scoggins and I, with the mayor and others, and listened to those business people talk about, another setback for them. It was really, truly distressful to see, truly distressful. And as we're working through all of this and answering questions, there's people who, instead of being intent and focused on how are we going to address these issues of disparity and race and racism and the problems that we're addressing daily in this country, I've got questions about, why are you wearing a mourning badge? I wear this badge to honor the life of officers who died. It's a long-standing tradition that we do this until they are buried, and 3 days after we can take the mourning badge off. But because of COVID, we haven't been able to do that. We haven't been able to pay homage and respect to 2 officers in this state who died in the line of duty. So that's why we wear it. It's to pay honor to them. If people want to know who's at a protest or who's engaged or what officers are involved, our name tags are right there. We are required to wear them. We know who everyone is. If you say Carmen Best or C Best, they know who that person is. So that is why we wear the mourning badge in honor of people who's lost their lives. Our name tags are there for anybody who wants to know anything that an officer is doing, that officer's name. And if they don't have that on, we'll hold them accountable for that. The mayor already spoke about use of force. I'll just reiterate, anytime we use force, it's investigated, it's looked at, it's reviewed. We have the most accountability of any place in the country, and I mean that sincerely. There is no place else that I know of that has a community police commission, an Office of Inspector General, an Office of Professional Accountability, a force review board, and all of the follow-up that occurs for Seattle Police Department. There is a lot. So no one is going to use force and it go unchecked and unnoticed. So I just want to reiterate how important it is that we make sure that we're transparent and that we're holding ourselves accountable to the public. And I'll just end by saying, as an African American woman and the Seattle Police Chief, what happens in the city means a lot to me. The issues around the death of George Floyd mean a lot to me, personally and professionally. Our commitment to you is that we will continue to make sure that we have a safe city and work with our other partners, including our fire department under the leadership of our mayor, to do so throughout my tenure anyway here, and certainly into the future. And with that, I'll close and I'll turn it over to Chief Scoggins.
Good afternoon. My name is Harold Scoggins, Fire Chief of the Seattle Fire Department. I'd like to once again thank our mayor for her leadership. It's been steady, it's been constant. It pushes us to where we need to go. I'd like to thank Chief Best for her partnership. It means a lot for public safety agencies to be on the same page, and also to all of our peers who've been working with us around the clock, and even during the pandemic. We have a really, really amazing team. I want to start with George Floyd, and you can put a lot of names to it, but myself as an African-American man, a father of 4, a father of 2 grandsons, every time I see one of these situations, it hits me deeply. And one of the things I pray for is I pray for justice, as the mayor mentioned and Chief Best mentioned, and I pray for that for my family and all those out there. So I want the protesters to know, the ones who actually did protest, your message wasn't lost. It was real, it was understood. To all those who did destruction and caused fires and things like that, we were paying attention to you too, and we did a lot of good work, and that's what I want to talk about. The Seattle Fire Department has some goals. One of our goals was to get staffed up with all of our resources to make sure that we can take care of the city, not just during the protests, but all those other calls that come in. And then when we hit certain thresholds, we called for help. And I want to thank our neighboring agencies. We had 10 fire engines that showed up from neighboring departments that were standing ready here in Seattle, ready to respond throughout the night. And then I want to thank our state agencies, because we put a request out for 25 additional engines in case it escalated throughout the night. And those rigs were starting to head our way in our partnership with Costco and letting us use their property, and Chief Batiste for helping mobilize that response that we didn't need, but we were going to be prepared. Why was that important? Throughout the course of the day, yesterday we had over 250 responses, but we had over 530 911 calls. That's about a 40% increase into our 911 center. And that's very important that we pay attention to that. Because what we know is those regular heart attacks, and they aren't regular, but those heart attacks and strokes and fires, they continue to happen. We had a fire last night on Capitol Hill that required a really large response, and we took care of that. We had another fire last night in West Seattle that required a full response, and we took care of that without removing the resources to pay attention to what was going on. So it was important. We had a lot of partnerships to make this work. I want to thank the community because I, like the mayor and the chief, walking around those blocks this morning, seeing community come together, it really meant a lot. It helps the soul heal a little bit, to talk to some people and to understand, why they were there and see the work. And trust me, there's some elbow grease going into removing some of the graffiti and things like that. That's a commitment to community. That's what we need right now. But we hear the message. We know the message. We're all grieving together. So I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiefs. I want to say that I could not ask for more steady leadership from my two chiefs throughout this event, but also throughout the COVID event. They have just been amazing day-to-day working to protect the public safety and the public health of Seattle. And also to the Broad City team. We had crews from Seattle Parks Department, Seattle Public Utilities, and the like working through the night to get out burned out cars out of there, to clean up debris and glass, to start restoring order to the downtown. And today, seeing so many business owners who were so shaken by events that their last chance, they thought, of being able to recover from these 2 months of economic devastation seeming to go away from them, but then from nowhere, but from throughout the city and beyond the city, hundreds of people coming and just helping clean glass, graffiti, helping businesses clean up inside their businesses. That's the Seattle we love. That's the region that we love, when we can come together even in times of pain and grief to really show that commitment to love and to peace and to justice is so much more enduring than chaos and hate and division. And so with that, if there's any questions, the Chiefs or I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief Best and Chief Scoggins. We have a large number of questions today, so we will get through as many as we can. I will read you in two at a time to give you time to prepare. And our first question will be from Deborah Horn, Cairo 7, followed by Chris Daniels, King 5. Deborah Horn, the floor is yours.
Mayor, and thank you to the chiefs, both chiefs. I want to ask you a question. We were down there in the middle of it, and we, of course, have heard about excesses from the police department. But the question that I have is, why weren't the police able to have better control of the situation? There seemed to be times when there were police officers on one side of the downtown and no one on another side. We were watching people loot without anybody there at all to stop them. So were you caught flat-footed? Did you not anticipate what would happen given what you saw on Friday night? And what will happen to the people who were looting, who were recorded and seen and photographed by a lot of people who were looting these various businesses?
So Deborah, I'm going to let either the chiefs do that, but I want to say, give you a partial response, and it's a great question. So I received that question a lot from the businesses I've called today and last night, and from residents downtown today. We had more Seattle police officers downtown than we've had in any other demonstration, at least since I've been mayor and before then, except for probably WTO. We also had hundreds of police officers either on call or in Seattle to help. We have had crowds of tens of thousands of people with the Women's March, with Torchlight Parade, with the Gay Parade. And we have never seen a problem like that because people would march and protest peacefully. The Women's March had, by estimates, over 100,000 people marching through the streets of Seattle, and we did not see any destruction. Last night, yesterday afternoon, starting about 2 o'clock, we had thousands of people pour into Seattle who wanted one thing and one thing alone: to cause destruction, to cause a fight with police, to steal businesses' belongings. And in order to keep people safe, the police must try to maintain their control and lines. And because of the number of people who were there, that's one reason why the curfew was so important. We needed to get the peaceful people out of Seattle so the police could get control of those people who were taking advantage, not just of Mr. Floyd's death, but the fact that there were innocent people in the city of Seattle exercising their First Amendment rights. And they knew, using those people as a cloak, that they could have their chaos, their destruction, and their violence. And they did it with every tool possible, with clubs and poles, with fire Molotov cocktails, with frozen water bottles and rocks. They pelted the police non-stop. And if there was a response by the police, as said, a use of force that was inappropriate will be reviewed by the very robust system we had. But when that kind of action happens, police do have to respond. They have to try to protect the safety of the public first, and then the physical infrastructure. I think they did it to their best abilities. We will have additional resources with the National Guard to help us in property protection only. They will not be armed. But it's not just Seattle. If you turned on your television last night, you saw this play out in every major city in America. Yesterday I talked to the mayors of Dallas, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City, Denver. The list goes on. We saw it happen. We will talk this afternoon about our additional preparations, but we prepared. We will be more prepared today. Chief, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just quickly, Mayor. I'm just going to reiterate what the mayor said. You know, we were dealing with a crowd. As the mayor noted, we've dealt with crowds of thousands of people before, but this crowd, this was different. As you know, the emotion behind the murder of George Floyd absolutely created a higher level of emotion. And so people were targeting the officers in ways. I've been here 28 years. I have not seen that in my entire career, and I've been to hundreds of these demonstrations. And you were out there, Deborah, so I know you know the amount of vitriol and angst and anger directed toward the police department was unprecedented, and the numbers were unprecedented. So we did as much planning as we could. We tried to make sure we prioritized life safety over everything else, then stabilization, and then property destruction. And the officers were working. We went to early morning roll call, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, we were still out there taking rocks and bottles, chasing around people, trying to prevent the looting that continued to occur throughout the city. So we have regrouped, we revisited, we're looking at other strategies. I want to thank the mayor because we needed that curfew to at least be able to have the folks who wanted to peacefully be there. They needed to move out so we could focus on the ones who were intent on nothing more than destroying property and fighting with cops. So that was what was different about this and made it a lot harder. But we're working together to find new strategies, and I'm going to believe, and I continue to believe, that Seattle is better than that, and that we can have other people deter folks from coming into their city, their home, and destroying the downtown core of Seattle.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from Chris Daniels, King 5, followed by Daniel Beekman, Seattle Times. Chris, the floor is yours.
My question is for Chief Best. The mayor just said that a large part of this violence was not the acts of allies, but by young white men. Just how many of the people arrested, and you said dozens were arrested, how many people are from out of state or not from our area? And also, why did this take the turn it did? What was the strategy? It seems like the strategy here on crowd control was different than protests we've seen in past years. Why were people still looting after the curfew was in place?
Well, that's a lot of questions in one question. I can tell you I don't have all the demographics listed out for you. I will provide that to you, Chris. Obviously, we're going to be looking at that. There'll be a lot of follow-up investigation about those who've been taken into custody, and we'll make sure we provide that information to you. I just don't have that answer at this moment. All of this is ongoing as we speak. Our strategy was really to try to make sure that people had the opportunity to exercise their right to free speech and to demonstrate and to protest in their constitutionally protected free speech rights. What happened in this case is we had a lot of people, and I know you were out there as well, a lot of people came into town with nothing but destruction and mayhem and intent to harm cops on their mind. And that's what, again, what made it different. And we had to really focus on, one, protecting our own personnel, two, protecting other people who were there to demonstrate their rights, and three, trying to address the people who were doing property destruction and were assaulting officers. So it was a unique situation last night. Again, I say unprecedented, but I think under the circumstances, you know, once the curfew was in place, once people started moving out, we could flush out and get to the folks who were causing the problems. We were able to address it much better. We asked for the National Guard to come in. They're here now. They'll help us with our assessment and help us with our deployments in downtown. So, you know, like anything else, you know, not everything is perfect. But again, I think under the circumstances, I look around the country, you know, and we didn't have buildings burnt to the ground. And we didn't have major injury. And there are people who are dead right now who attended some of these protests. So I don't want to confuse the fact that things weren't perfect with the fact that it was the worst it could have been. I think overall it came out better than a lot of places, and we're going to try to make it even better than that.
Thank you very much, Chief Best. Thank you for the question, Chris. As a quick reminder, we are short on time and have a lot of questions, so please keep your questions to one per reporter. Our next question will be from Daniel Beekman, Seattle Times, followed by Kevin Schofield, SEC Insight. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. I have a question about, we've had a number of reports from people on the ground yesterday that some of the deterioration or tension may have flared up in the afternoon at a point when the protests and demonstration and speeches at Westlake Park were just starting, and then there were police lines on some streets, perhaps blocking other groups of protesters from coming in there. What can you say about what role that may have played, or if that occurred? Was that where the flashpoint happened? Because we also heard people saying that there were police actions at that point as the crowd tried to come in without any violence on the crowd's behalf. So what can you say about that flashpoint, or was it at a different flashpoint?
So, Dan, I'm going to let the chief address that directly, but I will say I've heard and seen some of those criticisms that somehow it was the Seattle Police Department that instigated the violence and the chaos, and it's just false. There was video streams of all of these actions. And for me, as I said in my remarks, one of the things that was so remarkable is to watch the Westlake Plaza, where there were thousands of people gathered. And they had been gathering there for some time because some of the speakers were delayed. They were gathered, they were peaceful. It doesn't mean they weren't protesting in anger and have real reason to question the Seattle Police Department, police departments across the country. But they did so peacefully. Just blocks away were the people who came with nothing but a fight on their mind. And the video is very clear, and I urge you to watch it. Police are standing there taking rocks and bottles, incendiary devices. One police officer, had one land directly on him. And they were trying to keep that crowd from going to where the peaceful people were, who had a right to protest peacefully. And I think the people in the Westlake Mall didn't even realize how quickly the situation had degraded just blocks away. And we will be giving you a timeline showing the number of the time when various activities were reported into the Seattle Police Department Command Center that show very clearly how quickly the situation deteriorated from those people who came with one ambition alone, and that was to instigate fights with the police and cause destruction. Do you want to add to that?
No, you got it, man.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the question, Daniel. Our next question will be from Kevin Schofield, SEC Insight, followed by Simone Del Rosario, Q13 News. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This is a question for Mayor Durkan and Chief Best. Mayor, at press conference yesterday, you were asked about some police officers covering their badge numbers. You made a comment on that that was hard for some folks in the community to actually understand, and I assume that that refers to the mourning badges that Chief Best mentioned a few minutes ago. I just sort of want to clarify exactly what your message is around this, and whether you're saying, I think I heard you say that it's acceptable for police officers in situations such as the one yesterday to be covering their badge numbers, when, you know, in fact, one could argue that in a crisis situation like that, that's a time when it's important that people not have an impeded process of trying to identify a police officer. So is that what you're saying, and is this a policy that you would revisit and possibly change in the future?
So Kevin, thank you for asking that and letting me clarify it, and the chief may add. If anyone cares to Google mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-G, as if grief and mourning badge or honor badge, this has been a tradition in law enforcement for generations and decades. And the purpose of it is when a fellow law enforcement officer's life is killed, they wear across their badge a block memo that is taken off after they're able to bury that officer. Because of the officers' lives that were lost here, they have not yet been able to have that memorial service, and so people continue to wear that on their badge. There is no, I've seen some of the pictures and video where people are saying, hey, they're covering their badge, how do we know who they are? Their name is on their jacket. Every police official in Seattle is required to display their name. And those names and pictures of their face readily identify who they are. And so, in fact, many of the complaints that we have received have identified police officers by their name. And so I was no way trying to imply that it is okay for officers to hide their identity. What I was saying is this was not an attempt to obfuscate or hide who they were. It was there as an honor and a memorial for officers who's lost their lives. And those badges have been displayed for weeks. But every one of those officers in every picture that I saw had their name on the outside displayed on their uniform. If they don't, then that is an issue that should be subject to complaint. But no one was trying to hide who they were.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you, Mayor. This next question will be our last question. I know we have a lot outstanding, and we will reply to you after this with a follow-up. So Simone Del Rosario from Q13 News will be our last question. Simone, the floor is yours.
Thank you for taking the time to answer these questions. This is for the mayor and for Chief Best. On Saturday morning, the city cited the department's record for being able to safely monitor so many protests throughout the years. And we all saw what happened down in Seattle yesterday. We know that people were down there breaking the law. But my question is to ask both of you to reflect on the city's response. And in that early reflections, to you, what went wrong yesterday? Because there seemed to be certainly a lack of protection in downtown Seattle for so many people who live there, who work there, and the businesses down there as well. What are your early reflections on what happened and what went wrong?
So I think that's a great question, and we actually, starting last night, we're having those reflections again this morning, have been talking to the chief and adjoining chiefs on what we can do different today, tomorrow, going forward. I think the number one thing that was different is that you had thousands of people coming, not to protest, but to riot. And the way you can protect property and defend property and persons when people are coming to riot is different, and it's a question of numbers. We try not to make it a military showing. We want people to be protected as they protest, but the original purpose for the police presence was to make sure that those who were there lawfully could enjoy their First Amendment rights. It obviously degenerated very quickly, and we had to use tools like the curfew that we had hoped not to use. So we will be doing a lot of reflection after action. I want to talk also to a range of the business owners, the protesters, the residents, so that they know going forward that they can feel that they'll be safe and property be held safe. But again, the first line was to protect people, which while there were injuries, we're very thankful that there were not significant injuries. The second line of defense is property, and there was much more property damage and destruction than we would have liked. But if you have thousands of people, and then even way into the early morning hours, 500 people roving through in packs through Seattle, breaking windows, going in, stealing property, and running away, it's very difficult to get that under control. We're going to have different tactics tonight. We are going to enforce the curfew strictly. And I want to say to those individuals, do not come back to Seattle downtown, Capitol Hill, Chinatown International District, or anywhere else. We will arrest you, and for those people, we have lots and lots of video and photos, and we will continue to process the scenes, and people will be held accountable. But we will reflect. I think it's a very fair question. It's one everyone in Seattle is asking, and it started with me and the two chiefs at each one of my sides. Thank you very much.